I've tried to use the scenario with people like, well, say there's a cesarean section. If you're saying it becomes a person when it's out of the womb, if the doctor takes the child out of the womb, but then were to sort of drop the child and it were to go back in the womb, would it have gone from being a person to a non-person, or at what point does it have a stable personhood? And people aren't able, and even, you know, when I've been in debates or seen Am Faradi at debates, who I think is very honest in her debating, but she acknowledges that her criteria of personhood doesn't really come in until maybe the kid's about 2 years old. And somebody like Peter Singer, who again is one of the more consistent in his philosophy, well, he believes that infanticide should be on the table, and in that, through his intellectual honesty, like, it's abhorrent, but he actually shows where the philosophy of most of the people arguing for abortion leads them to.
Hello, Father Toby. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi, Isabel. It's a pleasure to be with you here.
And I know you've come all the way from London, so we're really grateful to you. And maybe to start off with, I know some people might be familiar with your face or even your voice, but for those who aren't, could you just give us a little brief intro into who Father Toby is?
Yeah, my name is Fr Toby Lees. I'm a Dominican friar. I live at St Dominic's Priory in London, which is attached to the Rosary Shrine. And my main job is as priest director of Radio Maria England. So yeah, I do occasionally get some people come up to me and go, "Oh, we recognise your voice. We've listened to you on the radio," which is nicer than my friends who say, "We always said you had a face for radio." But that's my main ministry now. I've been ordained a priest a little over 5 years, and that time being a hospital chaplain, university chaplain, curate in the parish, and now full-time on the radio.
Fantastic. And I know, looking at your pro-life journey, Father Toby, you know, that you've shared before with me that, you know, in a way it sort of grew alongside your faith journey. When did that really sort of start to come to fruition? Was there a particular sort of time that you could maybe pinpoint at all in your life?
I think, having been at a sort of notionally Anglican prep school, but then at prep school nobody was talking about sort of abortion, and then I was at a Catholic secondary school, and so in a lovely Catholic bubble, which I enjoyed very much. But then when I went to university, both my faith came under challenge for the first time, really, in that how can you claim to be intelligent and yet believe these things? And also, perhaps in a less hostile environment than perhaps might be the case now, but people also started to challenge, well, how can you possibly believe what you believe about abortion? The even bigger thing back then was about contraception and AIDS in Africa. But I started to have to, as I was growing in my faith and being asked to make a decision, you know, you're going to do this of your own free will, because nobody's checking up on you whether you're going to go to Mass now. You know, am I going to be all in? And I'm the sort of person, I want to be justified in what I'm doing, and I wanted to be able to give these people a good response for why I believed what I believed. So that started to lead to me reading more. And I guess I'm somebody who've always been led a bit by my head, and then the sort of the heart catches up.
I know often when I've spoken to people, they've said that it's when they've either you know, grown in their faith or gone back to their faith that their pro-life convictions have really formed. Why do you think those two often do go hand in hand with each other?
I think because the church is definitely the most visible witness to the goodness of all life in our culture. Now, there are plenty of people, and you know, we were chatting earlier, met them on March for Life and meet them from time to time in all walks of life, who do also have a real pro-life ethic. But the church as a single sort of cultural institution, there's no other institution in the country that's as consistent in its pro-life ethic. And so I think that growth in faith made me want to live out all of my faith and defend all of my faith more and more, even though it just seems so obvious to me that a pro-life ethic is so easily arguable from a purely rational, non-religious, non-reliant on revelation standpoint.
So when did you actually, concretely put that into any kind of action or begin to actually sort of live out your pro-life belief in any ways? Was there a particular time or anything that you did that you kind of think that was the sort of, particular mark in your life?
Yeah, it was at a time when I was either at law school in London. I'd done my law degree at Cambridge, and then I'd done a sort of gap year after that when I was at law school, or as a trainee solicitor. I started going to talks at St Patrick's, Soho, and they were designed to help you go deeper in your faith. And I think through there, I first came across Rob Cahoon and the 40 Days for Life, and he either invited me or I saw the sort of pamphlets that he was distributing to come and take part in a vigil outside the abortion clinic in Bloomsbury. And so I just went there one night by myself, not knowing who else would be there. There were two lovely young ladies there with me, and we just prayed the rosaries silently together outside, and then went for a drink afterwards. And that was the beginning of making friendships in the pro-life movement and starting to actually witness to this.
And did you find that challenging at all? Or?
It was a little bit. Like, I didn't have any massive nerves about going along there because I didn't really have any idea what to expect. And there were a few people who shouted at you. I guess you have a lot where cars beep a horn and you're not sure, are they beeping in approval or are they beeping in disapproval? It's like, well, I'll take that as a thank you for being here. But there wasn't anything particularly hostile. I was very touched by the way there was a hotel nearby that allowed them to store all the pro-life materials there. Whether the higher management in the hotel knew this was what was going on. But I just thought that this mattered, and if I believed this, I needed to witness to it, because when you start to think about what abortion is, it's tragic and it's also abhorrent, and you have to take a stand about that.
Yeah, and I think, like you're saying, because it is so tragic, sometimes it's almost something we want to keep at an arm's distance, because it is such an awful thing to even contemplate. But as we know, that doesn't help sort any of the situation out, whether it's for the children who are being aborted or for the women and men who are, maybe going through that challenging thought process of what should I do with this pregnancy.
Yeah, and you see that around the fact that you just cannot display images of abortion or show a video of it publicly. You can, PETA and animal rights organisations, they're allowed to publicly display videos of an abattoir.
Yeah.
But we're not allowed to display the reality of an abortion, because it is the truth that cannot be allowed to be seen.
Yeah, it's funny actually. Just recently, I was listening to a really old video created by the actor Charlton Heston. So that's going back a long way in the past, and he was talking about how we're not allowed to show videos of abortion on television back then. And you think, gosh, we still haven't progressed. Even now, we're not allowed to in any way show the reality of abortion and what the truth is, even if it's been people have been warned beforehand or anything like that. It's still forbidden, considering what gross indecency is on our television sets.
Exactly.
Still, abortion is the taboo thing. We can see from looking at you, Father, that you didn't continue in law.
No.
But considering you've got that past, that you were in law, I just wondered how you feel when you hear today and witness today how the law is being used actually to target pro-lifers, when we look at situations like Adam Smith Connor, who was silently praying near the abortion centre, or Olivia Tisici Bolt, who was holding a sign saying, "Here to talk if you want," and literally no more than that. And they're now convicted criminals, as we record this anyway. How does that make you feel? Somebody who obviously, like I say, was practicing law in some way because you wanted to do good with it.
It's awful. Like, it really is awful. And obviously, you didn't mention yourself and your own run-ins. it really is quite scary. Now, like, I don't believe in free speech as absolute right, because I would ban pornography. So, I have to be consistent about that, and people would say that. But the way that this is not done actually by proper debate in Parliament, but just done through little statutory instruments and at a devolved level where it can't properly be challenged or argued against, I think is really pernicious. And then you have all the ways in which this is being policed and the politics which goes into the policing of it. And then you just think, with what's going on in this country at the moment and the resources that are being put into policing speech or policing silent protest and what's going on. Like, I've seen thefts in shops and just like going through the underground in a completely brazen way, and nobody's doing anything about this now. Like, there is a level of lawlessness increasing in this country right now, and this is what the people sitting in the offices are deciding should be prioritized. And that to me is quite scary, and again just speaks to this thing. We cannot allow the reality of what is going on to be exposed. I think people know deep down that this is wrong, and that's why we have to shut it away. We have to keep it behind a closed door.
Yeah, I often say I think they're trying to draw attention to what people are doing outside abortion centres to try and deflect it away from what's going on inside, because that's where the real, we could say criminal in a moral sense is happening, activity. So you did join seminary, Father.
I did.
Was there any experiences there that helped you with your pro-life convictions? Is that something that you would have been taught about when you were at seminary? Or?
Obviously, you're taught in your sort of bioethics and also in your general moral theology and around sexual ethics, all things that come into the arguments around abortion, and then just by virtue of men and women who've decided to give their life to God in the religious life. Because where I trained in Oxford at Blackfriars, which is the studium of the Dominican friars, but we also have people from other religious orders and also laymen and women come in and study there. And I think it was through there that one of the Franciscans who I was studying with, he said, I go to this vigil with a lady called Amanda Lewin, and I started to go to the pro-life witness down at outside the abortion centre in Oxford. And Amanda would stand sort of on the side of the street of the clinic, sometimes just handing a leaflet to people, alerting them to the fact that there was help if they wanted it, and then generally sort of religious and other people praying, they would just be on the other side of the street, or just in quiet or even silent prayer. And there, I think there I in fact encountered a little more sort of hostility than I had done when I'd done it in London. But you're encouraged by the fact that actually, if you've got a woman who's going there to make this brave witness, that actually she deserves the presence of men to come along and support her in that.
And we've always found it very invaluable having men with us. Sometimes just to talk to a boyfriend can be really helpful to have a man talking to a man. But often I found when women have been constantly let down by men, and that's often the case for some women going to an abortion centre, that they will have had men who haven't supported them, men who've used them, to actually meet men who are there not because they want to get something from them, not because they want to use them, but because they really care. That can be so transformative. I've witnessed that time and time again.
Yeah, and so it was through that Amanda then said, do you want to come to the March for Life? And I'm not sure whether it was one of the early March for Lives in Birmingham was the first one that I went to, and then went a second year, and I think that's where I met you and met Ben and other people involved with the pro-life movement. And I think that's when I started to sort of come into it in the sense of something much bigger and something organised nationally. And is it wrong to say, like, I love the March for Life? Like, it's a
no, I'm all for that.
Not in this studio, it's not, but it is. You're witnessing for life, I think, more there than it being sort of anti-abortion, which it is.
Yeah.
But it's also this vibrant witness to the goodness of life, and it is joyful, and it's always such a sad contrast with the people who are protesting the march, that there's so much anger which one can only presume comes from deep hurt or deep fear, but the contrast between the anger on one side and the joyful witness on the other side is very, very stark, and something indeed which a couple of police officers once commented to me upon on one of the marches.
Yeah, and I do think what you've said is quite important about, we are more than just anti-abortion. We are pro-life. And I know sometimes people can sort of think when you're saying pro-life, oh, is that because you're ashamed to actually say the word abortion or say that you're against abortion? And I think it's maybe misunderstanding why people say they are pro-life. I know recently I was at the trial of Livia Tisici-Bolt, and actually the prosecutor asked her about being anti-abortion, and that was one of the things that Livia said. She said, no, I'm not so much anti-abortion as I'm pro-life. I'm not... Even in the past, she was saying when she went outside abortion centres before buffer zones, it wasn't that she went there to tell people abortion is wrong, but to offer them something better, if that's what they wanted, and to help them with that. And I think that is such an important part of our message as Christians, isn't it? That we're not just there to say, that's wrong or don't do that. We've got something so much better to offer you, which is why it's such a joyful message.
We're always first and foremost for Christ, but it shows with this language, because people didn't use anti-abortion when I was younger and first got involved with the movement, and there's a linguistic battle going on as well. And if you can portray people, we characterize ourselves as pro-life, but if you can portray us as being anti something, then that's to say, well, you're seeking to take something away from me. You're against something that I want, as opposed to our witness is for life and for all life, and that does entail them being against the taking of life. But it's only because first and foremost we're for something, and that's why we have to really resist being labelled as anti-abortion. But I notice increasingly certain secular outlets are starting to use that language around the pro-life movement.
And this is part of something much bigger, isn't it? When you talked about that linguistic battle, we see that a lot, don't we? Whether it's actually by abortion providers and those who are more directly involved in abortion, or whether it's by the secular media. Can you just share with us something about that? Because I think that's such an important point, and you as a Dominican who's particularly into preaching must be very much aware of that.
Yeah, well, some of the most terrible things in the history of society have been done through the distortion of language. So much of National Socialism and the Nazis required that people start to be considered not human who were in fact human, because once you change the language around something, you change our understanding of either what the action is or who the person is or what that thing is. And so I think as the science has improved so much, and our ability to see just how soon from the moment of conception that child takes on the visible form of a child, that's happening very, very soon now, that you start to then have to rely upon emotive language to take away the reality of what the science is now showing us, which is why people are now talking about, a clump of cells, or as soon as somebody is potentially considering an abortion, the child becomes referred to as a fetus, which obviously is just a Latin word which means small child. But because people don't have the Latin to know that's what it means, this removes the reality of what this child is. But nobody in the other side of the ward, which is in the hospital, which is all dealing with people who are going to carry to term and have the baby, no nurse is going, oh, and your fetus is progressing nicely and is showing. They're talking about your child because everybody knows that's what it is, but we have to use language to mask the reality of what we're doing. So there is really a linguistic battle, and you've seen that around so many other moral issues in our society, but I think it's particularly acute around abortion.
And it's strange, isn't it? Because it's the people, who are distorting this language are the ones who claim to be so interested in science. We're not interested in any of your God nonsense. It's all about science. And yet they'll be using things like blob of cells, which doesn't really sound a very scientific term to me.
No, and once they use it, they actually have no means of differentiating between, you know, what is different from me as a clump of cells, because by their definition, I'm just like a really big clump of cells, you know, slightly bigger clump of cells than I should be, but, you know, post-Easter. But there's no rationale for at what point that clump of cells takes on personhood, and you see when people start to get questioned on this that they really fall into trouble. There's somebody now refers to it as the magical birth canal in one of those videos, and it's very good. And I've tried to use the scenario with people, like, well, say there's a cesarean section. If you're saying it becomes a person when it's out of the womb, if the doctor takes the child out of the womb, but then were to sort of drop the child and it were to go back in the womb, would it have gone from being a person to a non-person, or at what point does it have a stable personhood? And people aren't able, and even, you know, when I've been in debates or seen Am Faradi at debates, who I think is very honest in her debating, but she acknowledges that her criteria of personhood doesn't really come in until maybe the kid's about 2 years old. And somebody like Peter Singer, who again is one of the more consistent in his philosophy, well, he believes that infanticide should be on the table, and in that, through his intellectual honesty, like, it's abhorrent, but he actually shows where the philosophy of most of the people arguing for abortion leads them to. But again, just from an emotive level, like, well, clearly I wouldn't kill a little child outside the womb because that'd be horrible. But they don't have a rationale for, well, at what stage going backwards does it become okay?
Yeah, and like you say, once killing a preborn child is on the table, then, like you're saying, anything else really is on the table. If that child at the most innocent and vulnerable stage in its life, when is more worthy of protection than pretty much anything, if that's up for being legally killed, then what isn't, you know?
Yeah.
So as a Dominican father, obviously I know preaching is quite an important part of your ministry. Is this something that you ever managed to preach about at all in any way?
I do. And I think that I was struck by something that Rachel from Rachel's Vineyard said, that if priests don't preach about this, then it becomes the unforgivable sin. Yeah. Because everybody knows that, as we were talking at the beginning about the church's consistent proclamation of the goodness of life, everybody knows that abortion is a sin. Nobody sort of says, "Oh, well, I thought it was okay." Yeah. But if we don't preach about it, and we don't preach, you know, and if you've done this, you know, there's confession and there's forgiveness, then it becomes the unforgivable sin, and people have to live with that and carry that terrible wound. And so when the scriptures lend themselves to it, you know, I bring it up always trying to do it in a sensitive way. I'm very conscious that chances are there's somebody on a Sunday, if I preach about this, that there's somebody in that congregation who's had an abortion. But I'm also conscious that if I preach about the goodness of marriage, there are people sitting there who are single mothers or single fathers, or whatever situation. When I bring in the moral dimension of the gospel, there are going to be people, you know, who aren't living that in its fullness, or at a certain point in the past. But one of the things that I've seen since I've become a priest, and when I was working in the hospital, and then just through general ministry, is that people who, even after you've not mentioned abortion in an homily, come like 20, 30, 40 years later and confess it. And you think, gosh, you've been carrying that wound for so long. And if somebody had given you the opportunity to begin the healing a little bit earlier than that, and it's heartbreaking, you know, when you hear the pain that somebody's in. Like, it's also very, very beautiful and a privilege to bring God's mercy into that. But it also makes you realize the importance of actually providing all the support and to mothers that we can, and of changing the culture, because so often you hear the person say that they felt that they had no choice, or that the man wouldn't support them, or threatened to leave them, or they thought their family would chuck them out. Like, sometimes I've met somebody who said, you know, it just seemed the most convenient thing, or I didn't want what I was going to have to give up. But by and large, it's people who felt that they had no choice.
Yeah, yeah. And you were mentioning, Father, how language is part of forming that culture. Mm-hmm. What about things like social media? Because we're very much aware when we're talking to young people who might be people who can end up falling victim to abortion and the whole culture that goes with it. They are people who are using social media a lot. Now, I know when I was last at a Youth 2000 event that you and your fellow priests were running a workshop there about social media. Do you see that as playing quite a part in this, culture which is so death-orientated?
Yeah, I see a lot of brilliant pro-life social media, but that's probably partly because the algorithm yes. works for me and what it presents to me. It did just occur to me, perhaps it should have occurred. There's lots of things that should have occurred to me quicker, but don't. But with dating apps, which I'm not on, just to clarify. But the idea, I was saying to some young people recently, the idea that you just swipe somebody off a screen.
Yes.
That actually just the objectification of the individual that this encourages, no, don't want that one, don't want that one, don't want that one. And think how you would feel if that's being done to your image or to your person, and this idea of just the dismissiveness of the other, or I don't like what they're saying, scroll past that, or I don't like what I'm hearing. And so things can become an echo chamber.
Yeah.
And I think there's also a bigger issue around the sort of the whole modern era around where comfort and convenience become the priority. Yeah. And our lives have become so much more comfortable and convenient. I don't know how I ever used to get tickets for a train anymore. Queuing in a station office, it seemed like you had to queue for ages and decide that you were going to travel about 2 months in advance. Now that's so easy.
Yeah.
But it does mean if we expect most of life to be incredibly comfortable and convenient, then actually when a woman or family find themselves in a situation of an unplanned pregnancy, if all of your life is oriented to an expectation that things ought to be comfortable and convenient, then making the hard, difficult choices for the good thing are going to be even more difficult for us. And the reality is that choosing to have the child when you feel like this is going to be difficult or you hadn't planned on it or expected it, that is a difficult choice, but so is loving in all sort of facets of life. Like love, when it really push comes to shove, it's the difficult, hard thing, but it's also the beautiful and the life-giving thing. And that's my bigger worry about the contemporary culture, that it just encourages us to prioritize comfort and convenience, and therefore makes our lives so much smaller.
And also, as you're talking about some of those problems with social media, something that's also occurred to me is just the pure distraction element of it, distracting us from properly thinking about issues and to giving things that time. When you were talking about standing in a queue for train tickets in the past, what are we doing nowadays when we're standing in queues? 9 times out of 10, people are looking at their phones when they're in the queues, looking at the next meme or the next thing on Instagram, whatever it might be. Rather than actually thinking. And I remember when we had the lockdown through COVID, I remember talking about Rachel from Rachel's Vineyard. I remember Rachel saying to me how she had an unprecedented amount of people contacting her. And I think part of that was that they weren't distracted by so many things in their lives. Maybe there was only so many hours they could spend scrolling on social media. And so they actually had to think about things, maybe confront things in their past that they weren't happy with and consider why. But I don't think we do so much of that considering and pondering in our hearts nowadays because we've got other things to distract us, haven't we?
And we tend to have argumentation by slogan because that's all that most social media has the time for. And there are some people, as I said, who are running pro-life channels and doing pro-life witness on Instagram and other places who are really brilliant at doing pithy little sketches and getting a point across their point. But actually that's an invitation into a bigger discussion, and one of the reasons why I don't want to be on the gram as my main sort of ministry, and I think actually radio allows more scope for the depth of discussion which needs to happen on these things. And so our presence as a radio station, and your presence as March for Life is you're on Instagram, but it's to take people kind of out of that swamp of distraction and invite them into contemplating something for a little bit longer. And I'm delighted that we're able to have you and the monthly pro-life show on the radio and give a little more substantial treatment to these topics, because I think we are searching for a life beyond the shallows and a life beyond infinite scrolling and a bit more depth and time for reflection and contemplation. And as you said, during COVID, people found even when I could scroll all day, actually, like there comes a point where I need more.
And also, I think when you look to nature, for example, you often find that the cure for something is where the disease is as well. So if you were bitten by a snake, the antivenom would be with the snake and things like that. And I think part of the cure can be through good use of media, can't it? Like you're saying, with you look at how many people are reached through Radio Maria and the different subjects and the broad range of Catholicism that is presented there, and just the truth that is presented there, even for many people who aren't Catholics, that can still gain from that. And just social media and different types of media. I know there's been quite a lot of talk about how many people have come to find Christianity this year, and we think of the different apps that can help with that, whether it's the Bible in the Year or whatever it might be, that are maybe helping people. So it is important, isn't it, to kind of like, if we are somebody who is maybe going to engage with people, that we use this well and do make use of it in the proper sense. Yeah,
we have to be in these places, but it's in order, as Jesus went into the places of sin and iniquity, it wasn't to tell people to stay where you are, it was to be with them, to befriend them, and then to lead them out.
So beginning to bring this to an end, Father, where do you see some signs of hope in the culture? Because as anyone who's got eyes to see can see, it's a very, very damaged and broken culture. But I know, as you've said, when you go to March for Life, there's so many young people there, and isn't there? How is that hope manifesting itself, and what do you really see as the signs of hope?
Well, I just think when I went to this year's March for Life in particular, and I was with some people who've seen. There's some people I see mostly at March for Life each year, which is nice. You sort of catch up with them there. We were in the pub afterwards, and I was like, "Did you feel old this year?" And I'm 44, and in church context, I still occasionally sneak into the young the young criteria, but definitely not anymore. And both within the church in general, there is this revival going on, and 16 to 25-year-olds are more likely to go to church than their parents. But on the March for Life this year, it really was very, very obvious that there is this young generation of pro-life heroes and this bold and beautiful witness, and they weren't timid, and I was really, really inspired. And it's so lovely when you see people and you're like, I don't know these people. I haven't come across them in my ministry, and I do a fair bit of young adults stuff in London. And I didn't recognize them, and they were much younger than the people who I ended up ministering to. And so it was lovely to feel really, really old at that. So,
it's not often you'll say that, is it?
No, I don't feel it when I sort of seek to tie up my shoelaces that getting old is lovely. But in this particular context, it was lovely to see how young.
And just how many families are there, isn't it? Because that's, I think it was Dr. Hayward, the ex-abortionist, who was saying, one of the things about the pro-abortion movement is that it will abort itself into extinction. Whereas the pro-life movement, we're seeing the families, the lots of children, and the celebration of life, which means that by necessity that we have got hope for the future, because we have got a future.
And I think you go there and you also see children with disabilities, which in the broader society now you see so little of. And I remember in one of the workshops, I think a few years ago, you did in the Emmanuel Centre beforehand, and a man spoke about what a gift to his family their Down syndrome child would be, because it had taught them all how to love better. And it's not to romanticize disability, but it said there's an intellectual battle around abortion, a legal battle around abortion, but there's also a question of what sort of culture do we want to be Do we want to be the sort of culture that says, like, if you don't meet certain criteria, then you lose your right to live? Or do we want to be the sort of culture that actually embraces everyone? And when there's so much of the mantra of inclusivity, the only way you can be truly inclusive is by protecting the rights of all the time, and we're the voice for that.
Thank you, Father. That is so much to ponder on there, and I'm sure that those who are watching and listening in have been given some real food for thought today. So thank you very much. Thank you for all you do with your ministry at Radio Maria and your broader ministry as a Dominican priest, and thank you for your pro-life conviction that you stand up for so well.
Pleasure being with you. Thank you.